So you open your laptop. It is like 8 in the morning. The coffee hasn't even really hit your bloodstream yet. And you just look at your calendar.
And it's terrifying.
Oh, it looks like a game of Tetris that you are actively losing. You've got these solid blocks of meetings, overlapping commitments, double-booked strategy sessions.
And they're all just stacking up way faster than you can clear them.
Exactly. So you just try to power through, right? You work 10, maybe 12 hours.
Because that's what we're told to do. You just put your head down.
Right. But when you finally close that laptop at, say, 7 p.m., you look back at the day and you get this sinking feeling that you accomplished absolutely nothing of actual value.
It's the worst feeling. Just total emptiness.
Yeah, you didn't write the proposal. You didn't solve that architectural flaw you were supposed to look at. You just answered emails and sat in on alignment calls all day.
You were busy, but you weren't productive.
Exactly. And it is this chronic baseline state of overcommitment. And we're not talking about just being busy here. Busyness is like merely a scheduling problem.
Right. What we are diagnosing today is much deeper than that.
Yeah, it's a paralyzing systemic inability to distinguish what is actually vital from what is completely trivial. We're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but somehow we're entirely stationary.
Which is why today's deep dive is so critical. We're looking at the learned helplessness of the modern worker.
Right, and we're using this incredible stack of sources centered around Greg McKeown's analytical framework, Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less.
And I mean, the stakes of this discussion are basically existential for anyone trying to build a meaningful career right now.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't, some cheap time management hack.
No, it's not going to tell you to color code your inbox or like set a 25-minute timer.
Thank goodness, because I am terrible at those.
Right. Instead, this text actually merges cognitive psychology, organizational behavior, and individual agency to address a massive crisis.
The crisis being that we've been conditioned to just accept this profound overwhelm as like the unavoidable cost of being successful.
Exactly. And the overarching mission of this deep dive is to map out the psychological steps you need to guide yourself toward what the author calls your highest point of contribution.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can map the route to that highest point, we really have to figure out how we ended up at the bottom of this valley of overwhelm in the first place.
And the irony is, the trap wasn't built by incompetence.
No, it was built by our own success, which is wild. The sources call it the paradox of success.
Yeah, let's talk about the story of Sam Elliott from the text, because it perfectly illustrates this.
Right, so he's the Silicon Valley executive. He builds a company, it gets acquired, and by every traditional metric, I mean, he reached the summit.
He literally won the game.
He won. But instead of feeling empowered and free to do his absolute best work, he finds himself totally consumed by what the book calls majoring in minor activities.
Which means he's managing office politics, he's sitting on pointless task forces, just drowning in emails.
Yeah, he didn't suddenly lose his skill, he just lost his selectivity.
And the causality of this paradox is what makes it so insidious,
Yeah.
Let's trace the loop that Sam Elliott, and probably a lot of you listening, get caught in.
Please, because I definitely see myself in this.
So it happens in 4 distinct phases. Phase 1, you operate with extreme clarity and focus. You know exactly what to do, and you do it really well.
Which naturally generates success.
Exactly. And phase 2 is, because you're successful, you get a reputation. You become the reliable one.
The reward for good work is just more work.
Always. You become the go-to person in the office.
Right, the person everyone CCs on the email chain because, well, they'll know what to do.
Precisely. Which triggers phase 3, being that go-to person just invites an absolute avalanche of new opportunities, requests, and obligations.
It's like a floodgate opens.
And that leads straight into the fatal phase 4. Because you have so many opportunities, your focus becomes fatally scattered.
You spread your finite energy over, like, dozens of new projects.
Yes, and in doing so, you fundamentally destroy the very clarity and focus that got you the success back in phase 1.
So your initial competence basically creates the noise that ultimately drowns you. That is so depressing.
It is, but the source material gives us this visual metaphor for it that completely rewired how I think about my week.
Oh, the sphere thing. Yes, it contrasts the non-essentialist with the essentialist.
Right, so describe the non-essentialist.
Okay, so it describes the non-essentialist as making just a millimeter of progress in a million directions. So if you picture a sphere, it's like this tiny, frantic ball of energy just expanding slightly outward on all sides.
But it never actually reaches anything.
Exactly. It's totally exhausted, but it's completely stationary. But the essentialist, on the other hand, gathers all of that exact same volume of energy and concentrates it.
Generating tremendous momentum in a single, deliberate direction.
It demands a really uncomfortable self-audit, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. It forces you to stop looking at the sheer volume of tasks you're completing, which is, how most of us measure productivity.
Yeah, ticking the boxes.
Right, and instead you have to ask about the trajectory of your investment. Because a millimeter of progress in a million directions feels physically and mentally exhausting.
It really mimics the sensation of hard work. Like, you get those little dopamine hits from crossing off small tasks, and it tricks your brain.
It tricks you into feeling productive, but you aren't actually moving the needle on the core metrics that define your value.
Okay, conceptually, that makes total sense. But I have to push back here for a second.
Go for it.
Because the reality of the modern workplace does not feel like a physics experiment where I just get to choose my vector of momentum.
Fair point.
Like, if my director walks over to my desk and literally hands me 5 different urgent projects, I don't feel like I have the luxury of picking the one where I have the most momentum. Culturally, we're explicitly conditioned to believe we have to do it all, or we'll just be replaced.
And that anxiety is exactly what the text addresses through the psychological lens of learned helplessness.
Right. This comes from Martin Seligman's work, doesn't it?
Yes, the psychologist. He observed this phenomenon in experimental animals. Basically, if an animal is repeatedly subjected to an unpleasant environment that it can't escape, it eventually just stops trying.
Even if you give it an exit later on.
Exactly. Even with a clear exit, the animal just endures the discomfort because it has completely internalized the belief that it is helpless.
Wow. And the text is arguing that modern professionals suffer from, like, a corporate version of this.
Precisely. We've been so continuously bombarded by this culture of more meetings, more metrics, side hustles, that we genuinely forget we even have agency.
We just become these functions of other people's choices. We completely surrender the calendar.
Yes, you look at a double book slot and you just say, well, I have to attend both.
Yeah, I'll just keep one on mute. I've literally done that.
We all have. But the linguistic shift from I have to I choose to is presented in these sources not as some superficial self-help affirmation.
Right. It's a rigorous cognitive reassertion of your own agency.
Exactly. The essentialist framework demands that you recognize choice isn't an external option handed to you. It's an internal action you execute.
So even if I don't control the chaotic options my director drops on my desk, I still have absolute control over where I deploy my brain power.
That is the core of it. And the author issues a really stark warning here. If you do not actively prioritize your life, someone else will gladly do it for you.
And their priorities are definitely not going to align with your highest contribution.
Never.
That is the chilling reality of the corporate ladder, honestly. And it leads us directly into the unavoidable reality of trade-offs.
Because we are so obsessed with cheating the system, aren't we?
Oh, completely. We want to believe the rules of physics just don't apply to our schedules, that we can somehow magically work harder and have it all.
But the sources highlight this brilliant historical example of confronting that delusion, which is Herb Kelleher.
The legendary co-founder of Southwest Airlines.
Yes. Kelleher is just the ultimate archetype of the essentialist strategist. His whole operating model was predicated on making agonizingly clear trade-offs.
Right, so let's set the scene for the listeners. Southwest is growing, they are gaining market share, and suddenly there's this immense pressure from, well, everyone.
Shareholders, analysts, even their own customers.
Yeah, pressure to start offering meal services on their flights, just like United or American Airlines. And honestly, it sounds like a basic, good idea on paper.
Sure, it would please some customers and theoretically make them more competitive.
But Kelleher adamantly refused, because he understood that Southwest's essential intent was to be the low-fare, high-frequency airline.
And adding chicken salads and sodas adds logistical complexity. It's not just food.
Exactly. It means more time required to cater the plane, which increases the turnaround time at the gate.
And if a plane sits at the gate longer, it flies fewer routes a day.
Fewer routes mean less revenue, which means they'd have to raise ticket prices. So he recognized that the trade-off for a slightly happier customer during the flight was the literal destruction of their core business model.
Let's look at the underlying mental model he used there, because it's fascinating. When faced with a conflict between two appealing options, the non-essentialist asks, how can I do both?
Right. They're trying to avoid the psychological pain of choosing. Because choosing means letting go of something you want.
Exactly. But attempting to do both invariably leads to unintentional sacrifices in quality across the board.
But the essentialist looks at that exact same conflict and asks a radically different question. They ask, which problem do I want?
Which problem do I want? That just completely reframes the entire concept of decision-making.
It really does. It forces you to admit that you are actively electing to take on a problem.
It implies extreme ownership. It acknowledges the fundamental reality that every single choice carries a cost.
So every time you say yes to a non-essential request, like a coffee meeting or some massive cross-departmental thing, you are simultaneously issuing a default invisible no to something vital.
You cannot escape the trade-off. The only variable you actually control is whether you manage that trade-off intentionally or just let it happen by accident.
Okay, so let's assume we accept this premise. We accept the pain of trade-offs. We accept the Pareto principle, the law of the vital few.
Which dictates that roughly 80% of our results come from just 20% of our efforts.
Right. So if we commit to only choosing the vital few, the immediate paralyzing question is, how do we actually figure out what those vital things are?
And the source material proposes a methodology that seems completely backwards at first.
Yeah, it argues that to do less, you must initially commit to exploring more.
It is deeply paradoxical.
Mm-hmm.
But the mechanics of it are entirely sound. Think about it. The non-essentialist explores a few options, just looking for, like, something good to do.
Because their primary anxiety is avoiding idleness. They just want to stay busy.
Exactly. But the essentialist casts an incredibly wide net and explores a vast array of options precisely because they are searching for that elusive highest point of contribution.
It's like sifting through a mountain of dirt to find an ounce of gold. You can't possibly find the gold if you refuse to sift.
But the paradox deepens here, because you can't sift through the dirt if your face is pressed right up against the grindstone all day.
Right. So the text introduces the necessity of escape and solitude. It highlights the practice of scheduling thinking blocks.
Like Bill Gates with his famous thinking weeks.
Yes, where he just isolates himself in a cabin with a stack of papers and books, entirely disconnected from the daily operations of Microsoft.
Or Jeff Weiner. During his time as CEO of LinkedIn, he would schedule 2 full hours of completely blank white space into his daily calendar.
Heavily darted against any meetings whatsoever.
And the necessity of this white space really comes down to neurobiology and how our brains process information.
Because the modern professional spends almost their entire waking life in a state of reactive processing, right?
Exactly. We are constantly scanning our environment for threats or stimuli, answering emails, reacting to Slack notifications, putting out fires.
And when your brain is in that reactive, hypervigilant state, it's using different neural pathways than it does during deep analytical thought.
You literally cannot discern the overarching patterns of the vital few while you're actively dodging the shrapnel of the trivial many.
I love that phrasing. So insulation from modern noise isn't like a luxury spa retreat. It is a strict operational prerequisite for shifting your brain state.
Absolutely. But here's the problem with the thinking week concept. If you isolate yourself completely, sure, you get clarity, but you risk losing touch with the reality on the ground.
So how does the essentialist stay engaged with the world without getting overwhelmed by the noise? The sources offer this really fascinating analogy here.
Oh, the journalist one.
Yeah. You have to train yourself to act like an investigative journalist.
Break down how that translates to personal productivity.
Well, think about a bad journalist. They just go to a press conference, write down every single quote, and print a literal transcript. They just collect facts blindly.
Right. Zero synthesis.
But a great investigative journalist doesn't care about printing everything. They are actively listening for the lead.
The single buried piece of information that puts all the other noisy facts into perspective.
Yes. And the essentialist does this with their own life. They are constantly scanning their environments, their meetings, looking for the overarching narrative rather than getting bogged down in the minute details.
And this scanning requires a mechanism for reflection, which is why the author heavily suggests journaling.
But with a massive, highly counterintuitive caveat that I thought was brilliant, you should intentionally write less than you feel like.
Which sounds crazy, right? Why would you deliberately cap your own reflection?
Well, because the habit has to be sustainable over the long arc of a career. If you sit down on a burst of motivation and try to write a 10-page manifesto about your day,
You'll exhaust your willpower and just abandon the whole practice by Thursday.
exactly. By forcing yourself to write less than you want, maybe just 3 sentences, you keep the cognitive friction incredibly low.
But more importantly, that artificial constraint forces you to edit. When you only have 3 sentences, You literally cannot write about what you had for lunch.
Right. You are forced to distill the day down to its absolute essence. So when you review a journal written this way, the lead surfaces almost automatically.
You begin to see those recurring, non-essential patterns that have just quietly infiltrated your schedule.
It's basically forcing you to be the editor of your own life's rough draft.
Now, speaking of things that seem counterproductive to a workaholic, the source material aggressively defends two concepts that hustle culture views as cardinal sins.
Oh, play and sleep. Let's tackle play first, because the text notes how Google famously integrates toys, games, and playful architecture into their workspaces.
And it argues this isn't just some quirky HR perk to attract millennials. It's an actual performance multiplier.
But the corporate world has such a dysfunctional relationship with play, don't we?
We really do. We view it as the antithesis of work, something you rigidly compartmentalize to the weekends.
But if you look at the evolutionary biology and the neurochemistry of play, it is fundamentally a cognitive expander.
It attunes the brain to novelty, it fosters adaptability, and crucially, play is one of the most potent natural antidotes to stress.
Which is huge, because when a professional is chronically stressed, living in that reactive state we just talked about, the amygdala basically hijacks the brain.
Right. And the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex problem solving and creativity, just goes dark.
Yeah.
We revert to primal survival level processing.
You cannot discover an innovative solution to a complex market problem when your brain is literally locked in survival mode.
Exactly. Play disarms that stress response. It reopens the pathways that allow for associative thinking.
Which is the ability to connect disparate ideas that brute force logic would completely miss. Which totally explains why you get your absolute best, most innovative ideas while you're in the shower.
Or walking the dog, or playing with your kids.
Never when you are staring intensely at a spreadsheet for 6 straight hours.
Never. And then there is the other cardinal sin. Sleep.
Sleep is the ultimate casualty of the modern grind. We brag about operating on 4 hours of sleep like it's a badge of honor.
But the expert analysis points to this landmark study on elite performers, specifically world-class violinists, conducted by Anders Ericsson.
And this study completely shatters the mythology of the sleep-deprived genius, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Ericsson studied the very best violinists in the world to figure out what separated them from just good violinists.
And as expected, the elite group practiced with incredibly intense, deliberate focus.
But the variable that really shocked the researchers was their recovery protocol. The elite performers slept an average of 8.6 hours out of every 24.
8.6 hours. If I told my colleagues I slept almost 9 hours on a Tuesday, they would assume I was clinically depressed or just wildly lazy.
McKeown actually shares this deeply relatable anecdote in the text about this. He talks about a period where he was pushing himself to the absolute limit.
Right, functioning on minimal sleep, totally fueled by caffeine and ambition.
And he suddenly realized he was, in his own words, intoxicated by fatigue.
Intoxicated by fatigue, that phrase is so accurate. Because lack of sleep impairs our executive judgment and our emotional regulation in ways that are nearly identical to legal intoxication.
And the divergence between the essentialist and the non-essentialist on sleep is just a complete paradigm shift.
Because the non-essentialist views the body as a machine and sleep as this necessary evil.
A frustrating biological tax that just robs them of productive hours.
But the essentialist views the mind and body holistically as the asset. You cannot execute your highest point of contribution if the asset is degraded.
Sleep is the primary mechanism for protecting and optimizing that asset. In this framework, an additional hour of sleep is not a lost hour of output.
It is a calculated investment that yields multiple hours of vastly higher quality cognition the next day.
Okay, so we're in the explore phase. We have scheduled our thinking space. We're journaling to find the lead.
We are playing to open the prefrontal cortex, and we are sleeping to protect the asset. So we're generating this massive list of potential opportunities.
How do we actually filter them?
Right. The text introduces what has to be the most ruthless, radical, mathematical filter I've ever seen applied to human behavior.
The 90% rule.
Yes. This is where the philosophical groundwork transitions into a highly tactical, uncompromising algorithm.
So it's a decision function. It dictates that when you're evaluating any opportunity, a new job offer, a request to join a board, a potential client, you have to define your most uncompromising criteria for what makes it worthwhile.
And then you grade the opportunity on a scale of 0 to 100 against those criteria.
And here is the mechanism. If the opportunity scores anything less than a 90, even if it is an 89, you must mentally convert that score to a 0 and systematically reject it.
Okay, wait. Let's really test that theory.
Mhm.
If I grade every opportunity and an 89 is a 0, I'm going to end up rejecting almost everything.
Yes, you are.
I'm going to have massive blocks of empty time, and my colleagues are going to think I'm completely disengaged, or worse, just not a team player. I mean, an 89 is a solid B+. It's a good opportunity.
And that is exactly the trap the rule is designed to expose, because the greatest threat to your highest point of contribution is never the obvious, low-scoring bad choices.
Right, we naturally avoid the 20s and 30s.
Exactly. The true danger, the silent killer of careers, is the multitude of good opportunities, the solid 75s and 80s.
The projects that are somewhat interesting, somewhat lucrative, but not truly vital.
Because if you say yes to the 80s, they will completely drain your finite reservoir of time, energy, and political capital.
Leaving absolutely nothing left in the tank when a true 95, like a life-changing hell yeah opportunity, finally presents itself.
This mathematical function of x equals x, if x is greater than or equal to 90, and 0 if it's less, is designed to force a binary choice.
It brings immense, almost painful clarity to a cluttered professional landscape. So you've done the exploration, you've applied the brutal math.
You successfully identified your rare hell yeah opportunities.
Now comes the execution of what the text calls the brutal art of elimination. Because, knowing what you should say no to in the privacy of your journal is one thing.
Oh, completely. Actually, looking your director in the eye and executing the social and emotional discipline to say no out loud is an entirely different reality.
It's incredibly anxiety-inducing.
And this is the exact choke point where most professionals just abandon the framework entirely. They cultivate discernment, but they lack the courage to eliminate.
And discernment without the courage to act on it is just a recipe for chronic anxiety. You know exactly how you're wasting your life, but you continue to do it anyway out of social fear.
Right. So to build that courage, the text insists we first need to define our essential intent.
And it's critical to clarify what this means. This is not some vague, inspirational corporate mission statement like, we strive for synergistic excellence and customer success.
No, an essential intent has to be concrete. It must answer one highly specific operational question. How will we know when we're done?
And the absolute clarity of that endpoint is what grants the intent its protective power. The text illustrates this with a macro-level career decision.
Yeah, the choice between becoming a doctor or becoming a lawyer.
Right. The moment you make that one single strategic choice, like I'm going to medical school to become a surgeon, you have instantly, automatically eliminated a universe of other options.
You don't have to wake up every morning and expend willpower deciding what to study or what internships to apply for.
The overarching essential intent makes 1,000 smaller decisions for you by default. It operates as this powerful psychological anchor.
And you desperately need that anchor when the daily requests start rolling in, because eventually you have to deploy the graceful no.
And the inclusion of the word graceful is key here. Saying no is framed by the author not as an act of rejection or defiance, but as an act of profound protection.
It is the ultimate boundary-setting mechanism, and the text utilizes deeply resonant historical figures to illustrate this. Consider Rosa Parks.
Right. Her refusal to give up her seat on that bus was a profound, world-altering, nonviolent no that protected her inherent dignity.
And on a different professional scale, the text examines Peter Drucker, the legendary management consultant.
Oh, he was notorious for his polite but incredibly firm refusals to conduct interviews or write forwards for books.
Because he understood that his essential intent was to think deeply and write seminal books on management. Every single request to do a podcast or write a forward, no matter how flattering, was a direct threat to that intent.
And what I really appreciate about this source is that it doesn't just offer platitudes like, oh, just be brave and say no. It provides a highly tactical no toolkit.
I love the no toolkit.
Yeah.
Let's dissect a few of these because they are so immediately applicable. First, there's the awkward pause.
Okay, picture this. You're in a meeting. Someone asks you to take notes and organize the follow-up. Instead of immediately jumping in to fill the silence with an eager, people-pleasing, sure, I can do that, you just let the silence hang there.
You look at them, and you own the excruciating pause.
It is a masterclass in behavioral disruption because we are deeply socially conditioned to abhor dead air. We will volunteer for miserable tasks just to break the tension of silence.
But by maintaining the pause, you disrupt the requester's expectation. And more importantly, you buy your own prefrontal cortex 3 seconds to evaluate the request against your 90% rule.
Rather than letting your reflex just commit you to a disaster. Then there is the no but, which is like the Swiss Army knife for professional settings.
You acknowledge the request, you decline the heavy lift, but you offer a bounded alternative.
Right. Like, I cannot take ownership of building this entire analytics dashboard, but I can pull the raw data for you by Friday. You maintain your boundary while preserving the relationship.
But the absolute most potent tool, specifically for navigating a corporate hierarchy where you don't have ultimate authority, is the third approach. Yes, what should I deprioritize?
Let's roleplay that, because the tone is everything. Your boss comes to you on a Tuesday with a massive new initiative.
And you look at them and say, yes, absolutely, I am happy to take on this new project. I am currently running the beta launch, the Q3 audit, and the vendor migration. Which of those three should I drop so I can dedicate the necessary time to this new initiative?
The genius of that response lies in its redirection of cognitive load. Usually, when a superior hands down a task, the subordinate silently absorbs the stress of figuring out how to fit 60 hours of work into a 40-hour week.
The invisible cost of the new project remains invisible to the boss.
But by asking what to deprioritize, you force the superior to explicitly recognize the reality of the trade-offs. You take the invisible cost and place it squarely on the table.
It shifts the burden of strategic prioritization back to the manager, which is precisely where it belongs.
Okay, I love the theory, but let's dive into the darkest, most painful corner of elimination. What if I'm already in too deep?
Ah, the sunk costs.
Yeah. Let's say I've been leading a software migration project for 6 months. It is plagued with bugs, it's wildly over budget, it is clearly not a 90% opportunity anymore.
But your team has poured blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Right. I cannot just walk into the steering committee and say, hey, I'm using the awkward pause, we're done here. I have to survive the political fallout of abandoning a massive investment.
What you are colliding with here is one of the most powerful cognitive traps in human psychology, the sunk cost bias.
It is our deeply irrational tendency to continue investing time, money, or emotional energy into a failing endeavor simply because we have already invested heavily in it.
And it is usually coupled with the endowment effect, right? A bias that causes us to irrationally overvalue something simply because we already own it or are attached to its creation.
We fall in love with our own terrible ideas, and we literally use past suffering to justify future suffering.
Precisely. To surgically remove yourself from this trap, the Essentialist borrows a ruthless concept from corporate accounting: zero-based budgeting.
Okay, break that down, because in traditional budgeting, you look at last year's budget and adjust it up or down by like 5%.
Right. But in zero-based budgeting, every single line item starts at zero every single year and must completely justify its existence anew.
So applied to your schedule, you stop asking, should I continue this project?
Instead, you evaluate the ongoing commitment entirely from scratch. You ask, if I were not already 6 months deep into this software migration, knowing what I know about its flaws today, how hard would I fight to take this project on?
Oh, wow. And if the honest answer is I wouldn't touch it, then you are morally and operationally obligated to begin the uncommitting process.
Regardless of the temporary political discomfort.
And the sources offer a really subversive little tactic for uncommitting when you are terrified of the confrontation: the reverse pilot.
This is one of my favorites. Let's say you generate a massive 20-page analytics report every single Friday. It takes you 4 hours.
You strongly suspect no one reads it, but if you formally propose killing it, middle management will panic and demand you keep it.
So you execute a reverse pilot. You simply stop sending it. You don't make an announcement. You just quietly pause the habit.
And you wait to see if anyone even notices. And the reality is, often, no one says a word. The activity wasn't generating value, it was merely a legacy habit.
If 2 weeks go by and no one demands the report, you have permanently eliminated 4 hours of busy work with zero political friction.
It is an incredibly pragmatic way to stress test the actual value of an output. And this entire phase of the framework really feeds into a powerful overarching metaphor: the professional as the chief editing officer of their own life.
The editor.
Yeah.
The text references Jack Dorsey, who viewed his primary role as CEO not as generating ideas, but as editing the company's direction.
And it quotes Stephen King's famous rule for writing: kill your darlings. Meaning, you might write a beautiful scene or craft a hilarious character, but if it doesn't advance the core plot of the novel, you have to ruthlessly cut it.
Because editing is fundamentally an invisible art. It is not about subtraction for the sheer sake of doing less. It is an act of condensing.
You are actively cutting out the good options that cloud the overarching purpose, which makes the remaining vital elements far more potent.
The text uses a surgical analogy that puts this perfectly. It points out that the best surgeon in the hospital isn't the one who makes the most incisions.
Right. The best surgeon is the one who makes the absolute right incision and leaves the rest of the tissue completely intact.
And executing that level of precision requires the establishment of rigid boundaries.
Which is hard because in our culture, the non-essentialist views boundaries as restrictive defensive walls that limit their freedom.
But the essentialist views boundaries as the source of liberation. Without clear fences, your schedule is constantly hijacked by other people's manufactured emergencies.
The text contains a profound observation on this. Other people's problems belong with them.
Yes. When we constantly rush in, playing the hero to save colleagues from the consequences of their own disorganization, we not only exhaust ourselves, but we actively rob them of the developmental friction required to learn and grow.
The visualization the book uses is striking. Boundaries aren't a cage, they are a grassy field. Imagine playing soccer. If the field has clear, visible boundaries, you can sprint around wildly, playing freely, knowing exactly where the edge is.
But living a boundaryless life is like trying to play soccer on the roof of a skyscraper with no guardrails.
Yeah.
You are so consumed by the fear of falling off the edge that you can barely move.
You have to establish your deal breakers in advance, like I do not open Slack on Sundays, so you don't have to expend precious willpower agonizing over the decision in the heat of the moment.
It is the architectural blueprint for a sustainable career. You build the fences first during times of low stress so you can maneuver freely within them when the pressure mounts.
All right, so we've done the deep exploration to find the vital few. We've endured the political and social friction to eliminate the trivial many. The schedule is finally clear.
But the work itself still has to be done.
Exactly. We still have to execute the software build, write the book, launch the campaign. How do essentialists execute these vital tasks without eventually just burning out their willpower?
This transition from the theoretical planning phase to the gritty execution phase is where the essentialist system proves its operational durability. The objective is to design systems that make executing the vital few feel almost effortless.
And the very first step is acknowledging a universal flaw in human cognition. The planning fallacy.
Oh, the planning fallacy. We are all guilty of this.
I am chronically, devastatingly guilty of this. This is the human tendency to wildly underestimate how long any given task is going to take. I will look at an empty afternoon and think, oh, I can knock out that slide deck in 45 minutes.
And 3 hours later, you're still formatting the title slide and questioning your life choices.
Literally. We are perpetually irrationally optimistic about our own speed and efficiency.
So to counter this neurological blind spot, the essentialist system rigidly enforces the implementation of buffers. The text recommends adding an automatic 50% buffer to all time estimates.
So if your instinct tells you a task will take 1 hour, you block out an hour and a half on your calendar.
Exactly.
Let me play the voice of the skeptical manager here, though. If I tell my team to add 50% more time to every estimate, they're going to think I am explicitly encouraging them to work slower. That sounds like padding the schedule. It sounds lazy.
It is not laziness.
Yeah.
It is professional risk mitigation. The 50% buffer is not there because you plan to type 50% slower. It is there to absorb the inevitable friction of the unexpected.
Because the fundamental law of project management is that the unexpected always happens. A critical software tool crashes, a key stakeholder gets the flu, a vital data set is corrupted.
Right. The non-essentialist schedules their week back to back, assuming a perfect, frictionless reality. So when the inevitable unexpected delay hits at 10 a.m. on Monday, their entire week cascades into a frantic, reactive panic.
But the essentialist, having systematically built in Slack, absorbs the impact calmly, adjusts the timeline, and maintains their psychological momentum.
It's about building shock absorbers into your schedule. And once you have protected your time with those buffers, you have to look at the process of the work itself.
The source material pulls in a concept from Eliyahu Goldratt's legendary business novel, The Goal. It uses the metaphor of the slowest hiker.
I love this metaphor. Let's lay out the scenario so we can dissect it.
Okay, imagine you are leading a scout troop of hikers on a single-file trail. You need the whole group to reach the campsite faster. The non-essentialist, instinctual leadership approach is to run to the fastest, strongest hikers at the front of the line and yell at them to walk even quicker.
But what happens? The group doesn't arrive faster.
No. The gap between the front and the back just widens, the line breaks, and chaos ensues. The physical reality is that the entire group can only move as fast as the absolute slowest member in the middle of the line.
You've perfectly described the concept of the primary constraint. In organizational theory, pushing the front of the line is a total waste of energy.
The essentialist approach relies on subtracting. You do not add pressure to the top performers.
You walk back to the slowest hiker, the bottleneck. You identify what is physically holding them back, and you remove their load. You take the heavy tent out of their backpack and distribute it.
Translating this to a corporate workflow. Instead of adding software capacity or demanding your top engineers work weekends, you identify the single primary constraint delaying the project, and you remove the friction.
And the text makes a brilliant counterintuitive observation about constraints. We assume constraints are always a lack of resources or a lazy employee.
But sometimes, seemingly productive activities are the actual constraint. For example, if you are writing a book, doing more research can mutate into the constraint.
It feels productive to read another article, but if it's actively delaying the drafting of Chapter 1, research is the slowest hiker.
You have to subtract the excessive research to get the actual execution moving again. It's a profound self-awareness check. We frequently hide our fear of execution behind the mask of preparation.
We really do. So you've buffered your time, you've removed the bottlenecks, now you need to generate momentum.
And the sources discuss the concept of minimum viable progress, or MVP, leaning heavily into the psychological power of small wins.
Motivation is a notoriously fickle neurochemical state. You cannot rely on sheer willpower to sustain a 6-month project.
However, psychological research demonstrates that making progress, even incredibly micro, everyday progress, triggers a dopamine release that generates a significant boost in positive emotion and subsequent motivation.
Right. The non-essentialist attempts to go big on everything immediately. They say, I'm going to write 20 pages today. They fail, get overwhelmed, and abandon the project.
But the essentialist defines the absolute minimum viable progress needed today. I am going to write 1 paragraph, achieves it effortlessly, and uses the neurochemical reward of that small win to fuel the next paragraph.
It creates a self-sustaining positive feedback loop. And to make those wins require even less willpower, you have to rely on routines.
The text calls routine the autopilot of execution. It highlights Michael Phelps, the greatest Olympic swimmer in history.
Phelps didn't just rely on motivation to win gold medals. He relied on a legendary, rigidly uncompromising pre-race ritual.
2 hours before the race, he ate the exact same meal. He did the exact same stretching sequence. He listened to the exact same playlist. Every physical movement was perfectly choreographed.
What Phelps was demonstrating is the outsourcing of execution to routine. By designing a protocol that enshrines your essential actions, you free up massive amounts of cognitive headspace.
When the pressure is immense, you don't have to expend a single ounce of willpower deciding what to do next. The routine just takes over your neurology.
The text suggests that to build these routines in a business context, you must audit your days, identify the environmental cues of your bad habits, and meticulously relink those cues to better behaviors.
Over time, the gravitational pull of the essential work becomes stronger than the pull of distraction. You're hacking your own behavioral habit loops.
And when you are locked into that routine, when you are in the flow, you have to maintain your focus against a barrage of interruptions.
The text provides a powerful acronym for this, WWIN, W-I-N. It stands for What's Important Now.
This acronym serves as the gateway to a vital philosophical distinction between 2 ancient concepts of time, Chronos and Kairos.
This is where the framework gets incredibly deep. Break those down for us. What does it actually feel like to be trapped in Chronos?
Chronos is sequential, quantitative time. It is the literal ticking of the clock. It is measuring your day in 15-minute calendar increments.
Most of the modern corporate world lives entirely and exclusively in a state of Chronos. It breeds anxiety because you are constantly aware of time slipping away.
Kairos, however, is ancient Greek for the opportune, qualitative moment. It is the present moment, fully and deeply experienced, where the awareness of the clock completely vanishes.
The essentialist is obsessed with cultivating Kairos by constantly interrupting their own anxiety with the question, what's important? Now, they violently pull their attention away from the unchangeable regrets of the past and the uncontrollable anxieties of the future, locking it entirely onto the present execution.
Which means we have to finally kill the ultimate corporate myth, multitasking.
The text is unambiguous about this. Multitasking is a biological fiction. You are not actually writing an email and listening to a conference call simultaneously.
Your brain is just frantically task switching back and forth, degrading your cognitive performance on both tasks.
The goal of the essentialist is unitasking. To achieve that state of kairos, the book recommends a practice called brain dumping.
When you sit down to focus, you take a blank piece of paper and write down every single floating anxiety, grocery list, and unreturned email bouncing around your head.
You physically offload the cognitive burden onto the paper so your mind is empty enough to actually enter kairos.
It is about achieving total cognitive presence. You simply cannot execute your highest point of contribution if half your processing power is silently running background anxiety about a completely unrelated project.
So we step back and look at this beautifully constructed architecture. Explore broadly, eliminate ruthlessly, execute effortlessly. It sounds incredibly potent. But if we're going to do a true deep dive, we cannot just act as cheerleaders for the text. We have to look at how this framework holds up against other dominant productivity philosophies.
And more importantly, we have to face the harshest, most valid critiques leveled against it, because no system survives contact with reality perfectly.
Comparative analysis is vital here. If we survey the landscape of modern knowledge work, two other philosophical giants stand out. David Allen's Getting Things Done, commonly known as GTD, and Cal Newport's concept of deep work.
Let's start with GTD. It is legendary in tech circles. The core premise is about capturing every single task, open loop, and idea into an external system, clarifying exactly what the next physical action is, and organizing it so you achieve a state of mind like water.
GTD is essentially the ultimate operating system for managing massive cognitive load.
It is devastatingly effective at fulfilling its specific promise. But if we analyze GTD through a strict essentialist lens, the primary critique is that it lacks a qualitative filter.
ATD is agnostic to value. It will teach you how to flawlessly, efficiently execute 100 completely trivial tasks without feeling stressed about them, but it has no mechanism to stop you from doing them.
Essentialism argues that getting everything done is fundamentally the wrong goal. It focuses on identifying what is actually worth doing in the first place.
That is a brilliant distinction. You can become highly efficient at doing things that shouldn't be done at all. You become a very productive hamster on a very fast wheel.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with Cal Newport's deep work. Newport focuses intensely on the mechanics of unbroken, cognitively demanding concentration. He champions rigid time blocking, digital minimalism, and extreme solitude to produce high-value output.
Which honestly sounds incredibly similar to Essentialism's thinking blocks and the pursuit of kairos.
They are highly synergistic, but they operate on different conceptual layers. Deep work is the execution layer. It provides the specific tactical rules for how to apply intense cognitive effort.
Essentialism, however, is the prioritization layer. It is the strategic framework of what to focus on and why. You need the essentialist philosophy to identify which vital project actually deserves the application of your deep work.
That clarifies the relationship perfectly. They are complementary.
But let's move from comparisons to actual structural critiques. I want to challenge you on something you said earlier because I think there is a glaring contradiction in the material.
All right, let's hear it.
During the execution section, you told me I need to plan for the unpredictable future by enforcing a 50% buffer on all my projects. You told me to anticipate future friction.
Right.
But then 10 minutes later, you told me I need to pull my mind out of the future, stop worrying, and focus entirely on the present moment of kairos by asking, what's important now? How can I rigorously plan for future disaster while simultaneously adopting a Zen-like focus only on the immediate present?
You have pinpointed a very real structural tension in the philosophy, and it mirrors the exact critique raised by a prominent analyst named Niels Bohrmann. We can refer to this as the Bohrmann critique.
Okay, so I'm not the only one who noticed this.
Not at all. He highlights this precise logical inconsistency. The framework demands hypervigilant, future-oriented risk mitigation while simultaneously preaching present-moment cognitive detachment.
It feels like it's asking you to be two different people at once.
It does. But Bohrmann's critique digs significantly deeper than just scheduling contradictions. He attacks the foundational premise of the book, its over-reliance on the power of pure reason.
Essentialism assumes that a professional can simply sit down with a journal, apply a rational 90% mathematical rule, logically deduce what is vital, and then calmly and gracefully say no to their boss, their spouse, or their community.
Right. It assumes we are all perfectly rational, emotionless algorithms.
Exactly. Bohrmann rightly points out that human beings are deeply, profoundly irrational creatures.
Our bad choices, our chronic overcommitments, our people-pleasing, our inability to tolerate the awkward pause are rarely just logistical errors.
They're usually driven by deep-seated emotional traumas, social delusions, a desperate psychological need for external validation, or an irrational fear of abandonment.
You cannot fix a profound fear of rejection with a simple math equation like f of x is greater than 90.
Borman argues that achieving true, lasting essentialism requires painful inner work, perhaps even therapy, to untangle the emotional neuroses that force us to say yes, rather than just learning a set of strategic conversational scripts.
Wow. That is a heavy, devastating critique. It suggests the book provides excellent logistical scaffolding but completely ignores the psychological wounds that prevent most people from actually climbing it.
And that leads directly into the other massive, unavoidable critique we have to address: the privilege argument. Is this entire philosophy just an elitist, first-world problem manifesto?
Think about it practically. An entry-level warehouse worker or a single mother working retail cannot walk up to their shift manager and deploy the awkward pause when asked to clean the floors.
They cannot demand a thinking week in a cabin to evaluate their highest contribution to the corporation. If they say no, but they don't reach a higher level contribution, they reach unemployment.
It is the most frequent and unquestionably the most piercing critique of the entire framework, and it is entirely valid.
The level of agency assumed throughout this text, the ability to push back on authority, to edit your responsibilities, to redesign your workflow, is heavily, inextricably dependent on one's position within a socioeconomic hierarchy.
To be fair, the source material does briefly acknowledge this, right? It admits that possessing a fulfilling career where you have leverage is itself a manifestation of significant privilege.
It does make that concession. Essentialism, as constructed in this text, is undeniably a toolkit optimized for knowledge workers, executives, and creatives who already possess a degree of capital and leverage.
However, a nuanced defense of the framework would argue that while the macro applications like taking a week off to read in the woods are restricted by privilege, the micro applications are universally accessible.
A shift worker may not control their schedule, but they can apply essentialism to how they spend their 1 hour of free time at home. They can apply the 90% rule to their media consumption or prioritize the protection of the asset through sleep.
It is a philosophy of reclaiming whatever micro-agency you possess, regardless of your socioeconomic status.
That is a fair, grounded balance. I also want to clarify a quick terminology note I found in the sources regarding educational essentialism, just in case a listener decides to research this topic further and gets incredibly confused by the academic literature.
Yes, that is a critical historical clarification. If you search academic databases for essentialism, you will likely collide with educational essentialism.
This is a completely distinct pedagogical philosophy originating in the mid-20th century. It advocated for a highly traditionalist, teacher-centered approach to schooling.
It focused on the rigid, rote learning of core academic subjects and was heavily criticized by progressive educators for being undemocratic, authoritarian, and designed to produce passive, obedient factory workers who never questioned authority.
Which is literally the exact opposite of everything Greg McKeown is advocating for. Modern personal essentialism is secular, highly individualistic, and entirely centered on reclaiming personal agency and actively questioning the default demands of authority.
Indeed, it is a collision of terminology, but philosophically the two concepts exist through entirely different universes.
Okay, so we've navigated the heavy critiques. We acknowledged the limits of rationality and the realities of privilege. But if we look at the macro trends of the global economy, the core tenets of this modern essentialism aren't just a luxury for the elite anymore.
They are rapidly becoming a matter of basic professional survival.
Let's examine the leadership appendix in the text. If you are managing a team, what actually happens to the culture when a leader fails to operate as an essentialist?
When a leadership team fails to define and violently protect a singular essential intent, the source highlights two specific, highly destructive cultural patterns that inevitably emerge.
The first is a culture of playing politics. When a team lacks a clear, objective goal to measure their success against, the employees quickly realize that the only viable way to advance their careers is to compete for the manager's personal favor.
The entire focus of the team shifts away from executing excellent work and toward the exhausting, toxic game of pleasing the boss.
It turns the office into a popularity contest.
The second, and perhaps more deceptive pattern, is the culture of "it's all good." The text notes that this is actually an incredibly dangerous state.
This occurs when a team is composed of highly motivated people, but they have no unifying direction. So everyone just pursues their own random short-term pet projects.
Everyone is visibly busy. Everyone feels like they are doing good work. But the team, as an aggregate entity, is making that fatal millimeter of progress in a million directions.
So how does the essentialist leader actively prevent those cultures from forming? What do they do differently?
They execute three distinct directives.
Sure.
First, they are radically mathematically selective in their hiring. They do not just hire the candidate with the most impressive resume or the fastest coding skills. They endure the friction of waiting to hire the specific person who perfectly aligns with the team's essential intent.
Second, they define that intent clearly and repeat it until they are sick of hearing it.
And third, they flip the traditional management model. They do not focus their leadership on micromanaging the execution of their team. They focus entirely on subtracting.
They view their primary job as identifying the political, logistical, or resource obstacles that are preventing their top performers from entering Kairos, and they clear the path.
And the necessity of clearing that path, of discerning the vital few, is about to become exponentially more important. The expert analysis in our sources connects this entire philosophy to the rapidly accelerating rise of AI and automation.
We are crossing the threshold into an era of unprecedented historical abundance in terms of production capacity.
This is where the synthesis of everything we've discussed truly hits the bedrock of our economic reality. For the last century, the fundamental obsession of the global workforce was a lack of efficiency.
How do we produce more widgets, write more code, or process more data faster and cheaper?
But today, and certainly over the next decade, efficiency is no longer the primary bottleneck. AI models can generate functional code, draft comprehensive marketing reports, and optimize complex supply chain logistics at lightning speed.
The crisis we are facing now is not a lack of output. It is a profound, paralyzing lack of selectivity.
We have spent our entire lives being conditioned to optimize for speed. But you're saying optimization itself is rapidly becoming commoditized by technology.
Exactly. As artificial intelligence systematically absorbs the shallow work, the emails, the basic drafting, the routine execution tasks, the sheer volume of options and output presented to us will be staggering.
In a landscape where you can generate 100 different marketing strategies in 5 seconds, the ability to generate them is basically worthless.
The uniquely human ability to discern, to look at 1,000 AI-generated options, apply a rigorous philosophical filter, and identify the vital few that actually carry meaning and value will become the most highly compensated economic skill in the world.
Essentialism is no longer just a trendy self-help strategy to reduce Sunday night anxiety. It is the fundamental cognitive roadmap for remaining economically relevant in an automated future.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom all the way out, past the tactical buffers and the 90% rules, the ultimate pursuit of the essentialist isn't really about achieving a perfectly clean inbox or a color-coded calendar.
It is a fundamental, defiant refusal to live a life by default.
It is committing to a continuous, relentless, and often uncomfortable cycle, exploring broadly to understand what is possible, eliminating ruthlessly to protect what is vital, and executing effortlessly by building systems that support your humanity.
It is about designing a life that is spacious, a life that is intentional.
It is the ultimate act of reclaiming your personal agency in an economy that is literally designed to profit off your distraction.
And that brings us to our final thought. The provocative question we want to leave you turning over in your mind today, building directly on this idea of the impending AI future.
Consider the trajectory we are on. If artificial intelligence eventually perfects the execution layer of our lives, if algorithms take over the scheduling, the coding, the drafting of reports, and the logistical planning,
if it suddenly handles all the exhausting tasks we currently tie our professional self-worth to, will our entire human value be defined solely by what we choose to prioritize?
think about the weight of that. If you didn't have to do the busy work anymore, if the Tetris game of your calendar suddenly vanished, and you were handed back your 40 hours, who are you in the white space that is left behind?
Stripped of the excuse of busyness, what vital, terrifying thing would you actually choose to build?
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you close this out and transition to whatever is next in your day, we challenge you to apply that brutal math.
Whatever you decide to listen to or work on or say yes to next, make absolutely sure it's a 90.